Hello, listeners. Welcome to Stars of the Golden Age, a show that highlights the lives of legends from film, music, and the birth of television during Hollywood's Golden Age, with a special emphasis on their lives behind the scenes. I am your host, Erin Carlson. Today, we will be discussing the one, the only, Vivien Leigh. Wait, didn't I already tell you her story? Yep, I sure did. But I had no idea what I was doing, so I'm doing it again. And I'm going to do it so much better. Vivien Leigh was the subject for the very first episode of Stars of the Golden Age. I chose her because of my late father's love for Gone with the Wind and Civil War history. I thought it would be a really nice tribute to him because I know he would have loved to hear me tell her story. And I did the best I could with what I knew about podcasting in June of 2024, which was not much. But I can do a little more justice to her legacy now with a little more time and a lot of valuable experience under my belt. So today, I will be telling you Vivien Leigh's story again. But I won't just be going from my original research and script. I have so much more to offer you today. I read an entire additional book, what is considered the best biography on Vivien Leigh. Vivien Leigh, a Biography by Hugo Vickers, in addition to the original biography I used, which was Dark Star by Alan Strachan. I am just so happy to still be here with you guys. And I'm so happy to have learned so much and grown so much and be able to have this opportunity to revisit my very first story. And I'm happy for all I have yet to learn. So, here we go. I present to you Miss Vivien Leigh. Vivien Mary Hartley was born on November 5th, 1913, in Darjeeling, India. Her mother, Gertrude, believed deeply in the Indian superstition that if you stare at Kanchenjunga, the third largest mountain peak in the world, one would have a beautiful child. Well, I'm not sure if it was the superstition or not, but a beautiful child was indeed born. Vivien's father, Ernest, was English, and her mother, Gertrude, was Irish and Armenian. Gertrude was beautiful. She had fair skin, beautiful blue eyes, and stunning auburn hair. Ernest had dabbled a little in stage work in his early adult life, acting in some plays with the Calcutta Dramatic Society. He settled into work as an exchange broker after serving in the First World War. Gertrude and Vivien spent most of their time in Darjeeling, nestled at the foot of the Himalayan mountains, while Ernest spent most of his time in Calcutta for work. Vivien recalled her mother being a wonderful mother to her as an only child, and the two remained very close throughout Vivien's life. Of her mother during her childhood, Vivien said she, quote, was blessed with an imagination that could turn ordinary, everyday happenings into an exciting adventure, and make you feel that there was always something wonderful waiting just around the corner. End quote. The Hartley home in Calcutta was stunning. Biographer Hugo Vickers was kind enough to share a lovely description, and you know how I love a good detailed illustration of a home. Here is what he wrote. Quote, 18 Alipore South was a grand two-story villa with a balustrade around the roof. The slightly crumbling exterior of the building was enhanced by a large garden with a mass of plants, arranged in 3 tiers of close-set pots. There were canopied garden seats, a tennis court, and distant palm trees. A huge oak coffer, adorned with crystal glass, stood in the dining room, and the walls were covered in nautical prints. There were heavy teak chairs and elaborate napkin displays on the round table. The drawing room had a marble floor with rugs and large, comfortable chairs. There was a grand piano and, in later years, a portrait of Gertrude. The telephone was in the bedroom, a fairly bleak room with white wooden furniture. The electricity was rudimentary with ill-concealed cables. There was a photograph, too, of Gertrude's mother, a stout, foreign-looking lady with round eyes, a high forehead, and a downturned mouth, end quote. That last detail was probably not necessary. Gertrude wanted her daughter to excel in her education, so she worked very hard in her early childhood years to help prepare Vivien for her formal education and for life in proper society. Reading was very important, so Gertrude made sure her daughter was reading fine literature and Greek mythology every day. Vivien was also raised as a devout Catholic, which was instilled very strongly into her everyday life as a child. With Vivien's parents living apart for much of the time, it was well known that Ernest was having affairs. Rumor has it that Gertrude was accepting of her husband's affairs, but there is a funny story about an occasion in which she reminded her husband just how aware she was of his behavior. Gertrude organized a dinner party, arranging for Ernest to arrive shortly after all of the guests were seated. Well, when he did, he was in for quite a shock, because the guests his wife had invited for their dinner party were Ernest's former lovers, accompanied by their poor, unknowing husbands. Gertrude always knew when Ernest had begun a new affair because he would always present her with an expensive new piece of jewelry. She wasn't exactly perfectly faithful either, most likely. One of the partners at Ernest's firm, a man named Tommy, was a very good friend to the couple. A much closer friend to Gertrude than Ernest, if you know what I mean. But it also seems that maybe Ernest knew about the special relationship between the two. Gertrude and Tommy traveled together often, sometimes with Vivien in tow, and sometimes with Ernest in tow. I think they just simply had an open marriage or their own special arrangement. Gertrude remained close to both men until each of them passed away. Vivien's parents sailed with her to England from India in 1920, when Vivien was 6 years old, so she could begin her formal Catholic education while her parents returned to India. Vivien was 6 years old when she began Catholic school at the Convent for the Sacred Heart in Roehampton, and she wouldn't see either of her parents for almost a year and a half after she entered the convent. And that's about the frequency she would see them throughout the remainder of her childhood. Her mother a little more frequently than her father, but still it was only about once, maybe twice a year for a short visit. Music was encouraged by her family, so Vivien learned how to play violin, cello, and piano. It was at the Convent for the Sacred Heart where Vivien first performed on a stage. She played Fairy Mustard Seed in A Midsummer Night's Dream and Miranda in The Tempest. Vivien quickly realized she loved performing. She loved being in the spotlight. She told one of her best friends there, fellow future movie star Maureen O'Sullivan, "When I leave school, I'm going to be a great actress." Vivien spent 8 years at the Convent for the Sacred Heart, followed by Catholic schooling in Italy, France, and Germany. She was fluent in English, French, and Italian. She loved Egyptian history, but she hated math. There are varying accounts from Vivien's friends and teachers during her childhood years regarding her personality and behavior. Some say she was lovely and quiet, and some say her behavior changed and was often unpredictable. One of her childhood friends recounted, quote, "Vivien would get along fine for weeks, a few months, be perfectly normal and friendly and involved in her activities. Then, suddenly, a complete turnaround. Sometimes it would last only a few hours, other times a day or more. But when it happened, we'd see a completely different girl. Moody, silent, petulant, rude, often hysterical. None of us understood it, not even the school mistress. She definitely suffered from some mental peculiarity that on occasion put her severely out of sorts. It was frightening when it happened, almost on the order of a dual personality." End quote. This was the beginning of Vivien Leigh's lifelong struggles with mental illness. Vivien graduated in 1931, and that summer she settled near London where her parents had relocated by now. She continued her education by studying acting at the prestigious and fairly new at the time Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. Vivien was 18 years old when she enrolled at RADA. She didn't stay long because she met Herbert Lee Holman, known to most as Lee, a barrister 11 years older than she was. When she met him, she said, "I think he looks the perfect Englishman. I'm going to marry him." Vivien wanted some kind of stability. She was pretty sure she wanted a husband. She'd never really had a stable family unit, but she wanted it. She thought so at least. And Lee Holman seemed like the perfect candidate for a husband. Vivien Hartley married Lee Holman on December 20th, 1932. Shortly after her marriage, Vivien became Vivien Leigh, adopting her husband's middle name to give her name a more distinguished sound for her hopeful career in acting. Because marriage was certainly not going to stop Vivien Leigh from being a great actress. But there was something that would slow her down a bit. Within a couple of months of getting married, 19-year-old Vivien was pregnant. And she wasn't super excited about it. Vivien and Lee's little girl, Suzanne, was born on October 12, 1933. I love Vivien Leigh, and I think she was born to be an actress. But I don't think she was born to be a mother. After giving birth to Suzanne, she said to her friend Patsy, "That was a very messy business. I don't think I'll be doing that again in a hurry." And in a letter to her friend Jane just after Suzanne was born, she wrote this, quote, "The spinster Holman is minute and does not allow anyone to be very proud of her yet, as she only makes rude noises, rather sneering faces, and shows a tendency to greed and petulance, which, however, is all passed off as personality by the more kind-hearted of my visitors. Lee is frightfully funny and most callous, won't even look at it. He shouts, 'Shut up,' even if it sighs. I have produced such a small-sized infant that I shall have to feed it for months. The thought is too depressing. Radiant motherhood, if there really is such a thing, hasn't descended upon me yet. But I really like it quite a lot." End quote. Okay, I want to tread carefully here because Vivien could have easily been suffering from postpartum depression, given what we know now about her mental health struggles. But I just can't move on without acknowledging that Vivien Leigh called her newborn daughter a spinster. This letter was written shortly after Suzanne was born. She called her infant child a spinster who made rude noises and gave sneering looks at people. Oh, and she was greedy. And little Suzanne's father couldn't even look at her and told her to shut up whenever she made even the slightest little baby coo. Poor thing. I always find it funny that babies were referred to as its, too. Again, everything about this letter to Jane is very entertaining. But we do have to consider the emotional battle Vivien may have been going through. She didn't want to be a mother. She wanted to be an actress. So that, coupled with her brewing mental illness, probably left her in a pretty dark place after giving birth. Vivien later said she tried to be the best mother she could for her young age. She had turned 20 years old about a month after Suzanne was born, and she hadn't really had motherhood on her vision board. Still, she wasn't going to let motherhood stifle her dreams of stardom. Thankfully, Vivien and Lee had a nanny, a maid, and a cook. Having a staff was a tremendous help for Vivien. She handed most of Suzanne's care over to her nanny. Vivien had thought she wanted the security of a marriage, But all in all, she realized she was pretty bored with motherhood and marriage. Leigh was supportive of Vivien's restlessness, so supportive that he helped her get back into RADA to continue her acting studies. A couple of months after getting back to her acting life, Vivien left her photos with the production office of Gainsborough Pictures before leaving for a Scandinavian cruise with her husband and friends. When she received a telegram during their trip that she would possibly be needed for a film, she bolted out of there as quickly as possible, leaving poor Leigh in the Scandinavian dust. Vivien Leigh's film debut was 1934's Things Are Looking Up, in which she had one line. From there, Vivien quickly appeared in several more British quota quickies, as they were called. Vivien observed and absorbed as much as she could during these first films, so that she could learn everything she could about the filmmaking process. A connection from a RADA friend led her to her first theatrical agent, John Glidden. John immediately fell into a trance through Vivien's mesmerizing greenish-blue eyes. He saw a spark and a force in her that he knew he had to represent. He wanted to transform her into a grand star. In 1934, she had her first stage role in The Green Sash at the Kew Theatre in London, which, fun fact, was a former roller skating rink turned theater. Vivien loved theater life. She knew the stage was her destiny. That fall, the fall of 1934, she had lunch with a friend and they took in a matinee of Theatre Royal, starring Laurence Olivier. During the performance, she turned to her friend and said, "That's the man I'm going to marry." Remember, she already is married. Her path would cross his again, but it would still be a bit before she was able to officially meet Laurence Olivier, at which point her life would be changed forever. In 1935, Vivien secured the leading female role in The Mask of Virtue, which ended up making her really seen in the British theatre world. There was reportedly an audible gasp as the beauty entered the stage and a very long ovation at the end of the play. Everyone was mesmerized by her. Vivien Leigh was an instant star. She was growing farther and farther away from life as a wife and mother. Leigh had hoped his wife would get her little phase of acting out of her system and then be ready to truly settle down into domesticity. That, unfortunately for Leigh, was not going to be happening. Vivien Leigh was now a star, and she would follow that star wherever she had to. During the early time of her budding career, Vivien and Leigh's marriage really started to go downhill. Vivien's agent had her out being seen in order to boost her face and name, and she often had other men as escorts to events and evenings out. Some of these men became the first of her casual flings outside of her marriage. She was already gone from her marriage. Leigh just didn't know it yet. There were plenty of other men in Vivien's social life, but it wasn't until she officially met Laurence Olivier in the winter of 1935 that she realized she simply could not stay married to Leigh Holman. She had to have Laurence Olivier. That first introduction Vivien had with Laurence Olivier, it was at a restaurant where he was dining with his wife. And they were there celebrating the discovery that she was pregnant. So there was that obstacle too. But Laurence Olivier instantly felt the same strong magnetic force that Vivien had. By the following summer, they were starring together in the film Fire Over England. And they were in the midst of a fiery love affair. The Holmans and the Oliviers began socializing together. And naturally, Jill Olivier, at least, caught wind as to what was going on between her husband and his co-star Vivien Leigh. They were conducting an affair right under their spouses' noses. It came to a point where they did very little to hide it. Laurence Olivier was bold enough to show up at his newborn son's christening with Vivien Leigh by his side. Still, Jill Olivier hung on to her marriage. She paid Vivien a visit to speak to her, woman to woman, to try to convince her to step away from her husband. As she arrived, Vivien offered her champagne. And then she confidently told Jill that she had full intentions of marrying her husband. And then she proceeded to ask her tips for being a good wife to her husband. She asked her things like how he liked his eggs prepared. Jill was stunned. And when she left that visit, she knew she had lost her husband. Within 2 weeks, Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier left their spouses and children to start a new life together. Vivien and her daughter Suzanne saw each other very seldom after this point. Vivien and Leigh remained friends for the rest of her life. He was always there for her. In the fall of 1938, a telegram arrived from Samuel Goldwyn Studios in Hollywood. It was a proposal for Laurence Olivier to play the lead role in Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights, and Vivien to potentially play a supporting role. Vivien urged Olivier to take the opportunity, but she was not interested at all in that supporting role. She was a star, and she had her eyes set on a grander Hollywood prize. Throughout the crumbling of her marriage and the excitement of her affair with Laurence Olivier, Vivien had found time to become engrossed in a long, gripping novel. And she read it multiple times. The book was written by author Margaret Mitchell. It was called Gone with the Wind. If Vivien was going to Hollywood, it would be for one reason and one reason only: to land the role of Scarlett O'Hara in the film version of Gone with the Wind, which she knew was entering the casting process. Vivien loved the book so much and the idea of playing Scarlett O'Hara that she gifted the novel to several other actors and then asked them if they agreed that she would be the perfect Scarlett. She just knew this was her role. She became obsessed with it. Meanwhile, Laurence Olivier was in Hollywood, and his heart was breaking into a million little pieces from the vast distance separating him from the woman he loved. He was head over heels in love with Vivien and could hardly focus on his film being so far away from her. Finally, Vivien had the chance to travel to the U.S. from London, and she had 2 things to accomplish. First, to be reunited with her love, of course. But more importantly, to weasel her way into the highly sought-after role of Scarlett O'Hara, the most sought-after role in all of Hollywood. She was one determined woman. 25-year-old Vivien Leigh boarded the Majestic on Saturday, November 27, 1938, bound for America. David O. Selznick had already searched high and low for the perfect Scarlett O'Hara for Gone with the Wind. The role of Rhett Butler had already been cast with Clark Gable, and Selznick always thought it was imperative to cast his female leading roles with the perfect woman. And this was especially important for Gone with the Wind, which was the most anticipated film in Hollywood history up to that point. When presented with the idea of Vivien Leigh as Scarlett, an unknown in Hollywood, he said, "No way. The risk was too high." Other actresses who wanted the role were Paulette Goddard, Bette Davis, Jean Arthur, Lana Turner, Loretta Young, Joan Bennett, Anne Sheridan, Janet Gaynor, Katharine Hepburn, and Tallulah Bankhead. Just imagine each and every one of those women as Scarlett. Filming of Gone with the Wind began on December 10, 1938, with the dramatic burning of Atlanta. and David O. Selznick still hadn't found his Scarlett O'Hara. The burning of Atlanta was shot first, so space could be cleared for the construction of Terra and pre-fire Atlanta. But still, Selznick needed his Scarlett, and he needed her fast. Then, as if the universe itself had aligned in the perfect manner to place Scarlett at David Selznick's feet in the most dramatic of manners, his brother Myron approaches with Vivien Leigh as the last buildings of Atlanta crumble in flames. David O. Selznick recounts it himself. Quote, "When he introduced me to her, the flames were lighting up her face, and Myron said, 'I want you to meet Scarlett O'Hara.' I took one look and knew that she was right, at least as far as her appearance went, at least right as far as my conception of how Scarlett O'Hara looked. Later on, her tests, made under George Cukor's brilliant direction, showed that she could act the part right down to the ground. But I will never recover from that first look." End quote. On Christmas Day of 1938, Vivien Leigh was officially offered the role of Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind was released on December 15, 1939, and it was a big deal. It still is a big deal, in my opinion. Gone with the Wind was nominated for 13 Academy Awards and won 8. One of these wins was for Vivien Leigh as Best Actress. She was now an international star. She had marched into Hollywood and took it by storm. But although Hollywood loved Vivien Leigh never really embraced Hollywood. Her heart resided in London. Although Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier were living as a committed romantic couple, and had been for a couple of years by the time Gone with the Wind was released, they were still legally married to their respective spouses. Neither Lee Holman nor Jill Olivier had been willing to agree to a divorce. It finally came to the point where they both knew there was no use hanging on anymore. Lee Holman and Jill Olivier ultimately agreed to a divorce so their respective spouses could finally openly be together. Finally, Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier were able to be married, which they did as soon as legally possible after their divorces. Katharine Hepburn was Vivien Leigh's maid of honor, mostly by default since she was dating Laurence Olivier's roommate and best man at the time, although they did become pretty good friends. The ceremony was small and private, and since the four had gotten lost on their way to the Santa Barbara hotel they planned to have the wedding at, the judge was extremely drunk by the time they arrived. He was able to perform the ceremony, which he ended with an enthusiastic, "All right, that's it, bingo!" It was just after midnight on August 31st, 1940. Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier's relationship had mostly been accepted in London, but Hollywood had been a different story. The idea that they were both married to other people had not sat well for many. Now that they were married, however, they became a powerhouse couple in Hollywood. But their union was not accepted, marriage or no marriage, by little Suzanne's school. She was being raised primarily by Vivien's mother, Gertrude, by this point, and Gertrude had brought her to Vancouver to go to Catholic school, like Vivien had. I believe she was brought to Vancouver because it was wartime in Europe. Well, upon Vivien and Leigh getting legally divorced, the convent kicked Suzanne out. Gertrude got her resettled in Banff at a new school, and Vivien stopped by for a quick visit on her way back to London's West End to return to her beloved London stages. She was even more applauded now that she had become a huge movie star with the success of Gone with the Wind. Her most prominent work during this period was the play The Doctor's Dilemma, which ran for over a year, 474 performances. Laurence Olivier had enlisted in the British Royal Navy, where he served as a pilot from 1940 to 1944. He was able to return on leave, And after one of those leaves, Vivien learned she was pregnant. Vivien was filming Caesar and Cleopatra in London when she found out she was pregnant in the summer of 1944. During the first week of September, she fell hard while filming a scene. Doctors and colleagues urged her to rest after the fall, but she couldn't. She was having a manic episode. She miscarried 2 days later. Vivien Leigh had started exhibiting clear signs of mental illness during her early teenage years. As she grew, and as her fame and success grew, her symptoms seemed to have worsened. Because with that fame came increased pressures to succeed and lessened personal privacy. She was described to have frequent bouts of outbursts, hysteria, mania, and irrationality. These were the terms used then. Her moods were also described as changeable. Today, we have diagnoses and treatment plans for individuals living with mental illnesses. Nurturing our brain health is embraced, and we understand mental illnesses better. That wasn't the case during Vivien Leigh's struggles with mental illness, and it made her life very difficult at times, and the people around her. Some close to her just attributed her often erratic and unpredictable behavior as part of her artistic personality. But really, she had an illness. Laurence Olivier said that there were two Viviens. According to a Washington Post article by Eve Auchincloss from July 17, 1977, Larry described it this way, quote, "One was my Vivien, the most beautiful woman on earth, yet without evident vanity, an enchanted being. Joyful, kind, uncomplicated, generous, moving in a cloud of perfume, exquisite in her manners, immaculate in her person, full of grace and taste and fun. This Vivien kept 75 pairs of white gloves wrapped in tissue paper, and at night covered her folded underwear with a napkin of silk and lace. She was a talented actress who worked twice as hard as anyone else. She was intelligent, cultivated, at home with literature, art, and music, had scores of friends to whom she was the most faithful and affectionate of correspondents, whom she showered with gifts, delighted with her wit, her stories, her games. She was a passionate and considerate lover, the perfect companion, the woman of whom no woman was jealous, who had once been the little girl everyone wanted to be like. She was too good to be true." For there was another Vivien, a hellish shrew who shrieked obscene abuse, who knew the most wounding things to say, who in her hysterical rages broke windows, ripped off clothes, struck and slashed at those she loved, who seduced the taxi driver, the delivery man, periodically grew fat, filthy, foul, and finally, after hours, weeks, or months of nightmare, would fall helplessly weeping, remembering nothing, begging to know whom she had offended, so that the good Vivien could write humble notes of apology. End quote. Isn't that heartbreaking? She suffered so much. Eventually, Vivien did see a doctor and was diagnosed with manic depression, now referred to as bipolar disorder, and she was treated with electric shock treatment. Mental illnesses at the time were kept very discreet as they held a huge negative connotation, so Vivien was left to mostly suffer in silence, and she often turned to alcohol to help numb the pain during her manic episodes. Likely due partially to Vivien's mostly untreated mental illness, the once deep and passionate relationship between her and Laurence Olivier had diminished greatly by the end of the 1940s. Mental illness wasn't Vivien's only health obstacle. In 1944, she had traveled to North Africa to entertain troops during World War II. Shortly after her tour, she developed fits of coughing and fever and was subsequently diagnosed with tuberculosis in her left lung. She was very sick and spent several weeks in the hospital, and she would suffer with this for the rest of her life. In the spring of 1949, Vivien was approached by Broadway producer Irene Selznick, former wife of Gone with the Wind producer David Selznick and daughter of Louis B. Mayer, alongside playwright Tennessee Williams, to star on the London stage in Williams' play A Streetcar Named Desire, which had just finished on Broadway. Upon meeting her through Irene Selznick, Tennessee Williams really wanted Vivien to play the role of Blanche Dubois. He felt connected to her on an emotional level because he thought, quote, "She realized that I live with the same nervous torment," end quote, as she did. Elia Kazan had directed the Broadway production, which starred Jessica Tandy and Marlon Brando. For the London production, Laurence Olivier would be the director. Writer Alan Dent wrote that her performance was, quote, "certainly one of the most harrowing things I have ever seen in theater anywhere. In trying to tear at my heartstrings, she certainly tore at her own. It was like looking on at some beautiful little town being destroyed by an earthquake," end quote. Every single one of the 229 performances took a huge emotional toll on Vivien Leigh. I have only seen the film version, but I've read that because of censorship restrictions, the original stage version is much more intense and emotional. So if you've seen it, imagine her emotional state and doing that performance night after night. I can't imagine it was emotionally easy for her. Vivien continued the role of Blanche Dubois, as did Marlon Brando, on the silver screen in that screen version I just mentioned. She and Laurence traveled back to Hollywood in the summer of 1950 for filming. Before returning to England, Danny Kaye hosted a star-studded party for the Oliviers in the Crystal Room of the Beverly Hills Hotel. Everyone in Hollywood wanted to be invited to this party. Here are some who made the cut: Errol Flynn, Eddie Cantor, Ginger Rogers, Louis B. Mayer, Groucho Marx, Sid Charisse, Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall, and Agent Johnny Hyde with his date, a mostly unknown blonde named Marilyn Monroe. Vivien looked perfectly stunning that night in an elegant olive green dress. A Streetcar Named Desire earned Vivien Leigh her second Academy Award. It also had detrimental effects on her mental health. She said Streetcar had, quote, "tipped me over into madness." Playing the role of Blanche Dubois hit too close to home. Another pregnancy and subsequent miscarriage came in 1956. This, as you can imagine, sent Vivien further into deep depression and despair. She, by this time, had received countless electric shock treatments. Her episodes were so intense and so frequent that Laurence Olivier thought she had schizophrenia. After years of struggles, Vivien had begun learning how to recognize the symptoms and know when her manic episodes were approaching, so she could best prepare herself and avoid social events. Hugo Vickers' biography shares many first-hand examples and written records of Vivien's behavior during her manic episodes. I know it wasn't easy for the people that had to endure them with her, but most of them were incredibly alarming, and Vivien was always so mortified when she learned of her behavior once calmed. Embarrassing things were shared in the book, which was written in the 1980s, and I'm just not going to get into that here. I think that quote from her husband was enough. Just know Vivien Leigh was sick. She didn't choose to have those episodes or to act in the manner she did during the worst of times. She had many good days too, we need to remember that. She did have happiness and peace. Throughout her increasingly difficult mental health struggles, those who knew her still saw her just as shining as she'd always been. She was described as a perfect English rose, beautiful, magnificent, magical, a masterpiece, although sometimes flawed. She was the crown jewel of England, and she was beloved. But she was suffering much of the time. Vivien had several stays in mental health facilities, asylums as they were called then, as part of her ongoing treatment. At the end of one such stay in the late 1950s, Vivien returned home to an exhausted husband who confessed to her that he didn't know if he wanted to go on in their marriage. It didn't help that they were both having affairs, and that led to some pretty intense arguments between the two, some that turned physical. Laurence Olivier recalled, quote, "I realized with horror that each of us was quite capable of murdering or causing death to the other." End quote. In the end, Vivien's mental illness and a diagnosis that could probably be easily treated today led to the end of her marriage with Laurence Olivier, a marriage that could have lasted a lifetime full of passion, joy, and happiness. It just came to the point where Larry couldn't handle it anymore, and he found company in a young actress named Joan Plowright, 22 years younger than he was, and also married. She had actually played his daughter in The Entertainer. Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier's marriage came to an end in 1958 after years of intensity, both the great kind and the terrible kind. Their divorce was finalized in late 1960. The Daily Mail wrote of their divorce, "A legend crumbles, the magic turns to myth." Vivien had never kept her feet off the stage for too long throughout her life, movies too. But the stage is where she felt she was meant to be. Sometimes the exhaustive schedule of a long West End or Broadway production had ill effects on her mental health, but she really needed to keep acting to maintain her purpose, and to have that emotional outlet, I'm sure. In early 1960, Vivien traveled to the U.S. to do a production of Duel of Angels on Broadway. In a supporting role was an actor that she'd known casually for decades, Jack Marivelle. They connected in a romantic way now. Soon, Jack realized just what would be involved in being in a relationship with Vivien. She needed a lot of support during her episodes. When he accompanied her to the first electric shock treatment, he experienced a shock of his own. He witnessed her come out of the treatment room with a terrible headache and burn marks on her temples, and then go to the theater and perform her heart out on stage that night. This was her life. This was what it was like to be Vivien Leigh. And this is what it would be like for him to be in her life. Her friends helped him to understand how best to help her, and he was willing to take on that role in her life. She was worth it to him. He stayed with her for the rest of her life, which sadly wasn't long. In early June 1967, Vivien received X-ray results that showed a large patch on her left lung, a result of the tuberculosis she was diagnosed with over 20 years earlier. She had been rehearsing for the play A Delicate Balance, which had to be postponed now while she healed. She was home in bed with her beloved cat, Pooh Jones, by her side, and Jack caring for her. Unfortunately, Vivien's feet would never touch the stage again. In the very early hours of July 8th, Jack found Vivien lying on the floor next to the bed in their London home, surrounded by blood. It appeared she had attempted to get up and collapsed due to her lungs being filled with blood, due to the severity of the tuberculosis. Jack tried to help Vivien, but it was too late. Vivien Leigh, a beautiful, talented, and tormented legend, had lost her battle with tuberculosis on July 8, 1967, at the young age of 53. When her death was publicly announced, every theater in London's West End turned out their marquee lights for 1 hour to pay tribute to the beloved actress who had lit up their stages for decades. And now I would like to share some other interesting things I learned during my research. Bullet point number 1. Vivien loved gardening and flowers, and she often sent flowers to her friends on birthdays and opening nights. On her deathbed, under strict direction to stay in bed, She broke the rules a few times to get up and tend to the many flowers in her room that she had received from friends and colleagues. Flowers just made her really happy. Bullet point number 2. Vivien was very self-conscious of her hands. She thought they were too large. So she liked to wear gloves to disguise them. As Laurence Olivier had quoted, she had 75 pairs of gloves, but I also read that she had up to 150 pairs of gloves. Bullet point number 3. Jack received many wonderful letters of sympathy and support after Vivien passed away. One that he really treasured came from Katharine Hepburn. She wrote, quote, "Devotion is a rare quality, and even I personally used to rest more easily about Viv because she had you. I knew that you would stick. I think she bothered all her friends, but you were the one who delivered the goods and really enabled her to go on as long as she did." End quote. Jack Marivelle personally responded to every single letter he received. Bullet point number 4. Vivien was a heavy smoker, smoking 4 packs per day at the height of it. Bullet point number 5. A really sad fact following Vivien's death is that her agent, Cecil Tennant, was killed in a car accident on the way home to Surrey from Vivien's funeral in London. Bullet point number 6. Vivien Leigh used one of her Oscar awards as a door stopper in her bathroom. That's my favorite. I love that. Bullet point number 7. David O. Selznick didn't read Margaret Mitchell's novel, Gone with the Wind, until after he had purchased the film rights to the story. I guess he was just going off the hype of it. In conclusion, Vivien Leigh was a goddess of the stage and screen, a true icon. Her talent earned her 2 Academy Awards and a Tony Award. She was beloved by those close to her, but it wasn't always easy for them. Vivien Leigh struggled throughout her life with her mental health. Her episodes were often severe and it affected everyone around her. But it didn't affect anyone as immensely as it affected her. Vivien Leigh must have suffered so badly within the confines of her own mind, much like Blanche Dubois in A Streetcar Named Desire. It's difficult to not imagine how different Vivien Leigh's life may have been if she were to live today, with the support and treatment we have for mental illnesses today. Would she have been able to live a more balanced life? Would she have been a better mother? Had better relationships? I think the answer would be yes to all of those questions. The resources and treatments available today are so much more advanced than what was offered to her during her lifetime. And the resources for people supporting loved ones with mental illness as well. Throughout her career, Vivien Leigh suffered with both her mental illness and tuberculosis. But most days, unless you were one of the people in her close circle, you would never know. She put every ounce of her energy into her acting and did everything she could to deliver, no matter what kind of suffering or pain she was experiencing. She was devoted to the stage. She was a star. Thank you, Vivien Leigh, for enduring a silent battle with your emotional health and still having the strength and determination to be one of the greatest actresses of your time. Thank you for leaning on that determination to get the role you wanted more than anything. There is only one Scarlett O'Hara, and that is you, Miss Vivien Leigh. And thank you all for allowing me to take the journey back through Vivien Leigh's life. I'm so happy to still be here sharing these stories with you. Thank you all for listening. If you are experiencing mental health challenges, know that help is there for you. You can call or text the 988 Lifeline at any time, 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, 365 days per year. You can call 988 or you can text 988. Or you can visit 988lifeline.org for more information or to chat with a counselor. You are never alone. Reach for the positive in every day, be kind to everyone you encounter, take care of your mental health, and have a great rest of your week. For this episode, I used two wonderful biographies, Dark Star, a biography of Vivien Leigh by Alan Strachan, and Vivien Leigh, a biography by Hugo Vickers. I also used a Washington Post article by Eve Auchincloss from July 17, 1977, titled The Two Faces of Vivien Leigh, a Harper's Bazaar article by Chanel Vargas from October 9, 2017, titled A Timeline of Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier's Tragic Love Story, an article from Bravo magazine from February 15, 2025, titled A Legend in Two Acts, The Life and Complexity of Vivien Leigh, by MiscelAna, Biography.com, and IMDB.